Hello everyone. Today I wanted to give my opinions on an issue that is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I am intimately familiar with, and that is losing in League of Legends. You see, I've been playing League of Legends now for 10 years, and in that time I have lost my fair share of lanes. I've lost every lane you can imagine. Lanes where I've been counterpicked, lanes where I've counterpicked the enemy and still somehow lost, lanes where I've had ganks, and lanes where the enemy jungler has pitched a tent in Riverbush. So in saying all of that, I think I'm reasonably qualified to give my opinion on losing lane in League of Legends and why I think most players are doing it badly. I'm going to break this video down into a few parts. Firstly, a quick summary and some examples of the issues I'm talking about. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why I think players are bad at losing lane. And thirdly, I'm going to give some advice on how you can improve your League of Legends gameplay by acknowledging the issue and trying to prevent it. So firstly, a quick summary. Losing lane in League of Legends is inevitable. No matter how good you are, at some point you're going to be in a losing lane. In my opinion, players in solo queue get too focused on winning their own lane rather than playing to their team's overall win condition. Emotion plays a huge role in this, as players with larger egos will continually attempt to salvage lost lanes even when there are better options available. For some players, the idea of being perceived as a worse laner than their opponent is so revolting that their only option is to double down, begin to intentionally feed, and then claim that was their goal from the start. I'm sure we've all seen these players in our solo queue games. This sort of behaviour leads to more lanes being complete blowouts, with awful scores like 0-8, 1-7, etc. being commonplace. In League, one player letting their ego control their gameplay can easily ruin a perfectly winnable game for the rest of their team. And that's down to this idea that I like to call acceleration, which I'll come on to in detail later. To combat this, I want to get players to think about the team as a collective unit, where one person's success is shared by everyone. Additionally, I want players to consider the idea of a win condition, rather than just assuming their only path to victory is by smashing the person that they're actually laning against. So what do I mean exactly by losing a lane in the wrong way? Well, for me, an example of losing lane in the wrong way would be something like this. You're playing top lane Vayne against Darius. It's a matchup you've dominated in the past, but unfortunately this Darius is playing smart. He's itemised well for the ranged poke, he's sacrificing some CS in order to stay healthy, and he's freezing the lane under his tower where possible to make it difficult for you to get a kill. In your attempt to break the freeze, you were caught by the enemy jungler. You nearly killed the Darius in the 2v1, but despite burning Flash and Ghost, you're now a kill down on the Darius. Your jungler has prioritised bot side of the map, and thanks to him, your team has secured an early dragon, as well as strong leads in both mid and bot lane. At this point, you have a couple of options. You could accept that the Darius has a slight gold and experience lead. Play accordingly, perhaps having to play slightly safer now that you're down summoners. Your team is dominating the map, and by playing safe you can move into the mid game not significantly behind the Darius. Your chances of winning the game are good. Alternatively, you can say, screw the rest of the team, I'm not losing to this Darius, while continuing to play aggressively. You're a squishy AD carry with no summoners, alone in the top lane against a Darius and occasionally his jungler. That first kill was luck, you'll probably think to yourself. But as the minutes roll by, your death count increases. You're now 1-7, having spread the love to both the Darius and his Olaf jungle. As players begin to group around major objectives in the mid-game, the consequences of your actions become clear. The rest of your team were ahead compared to their lane opponents, but the Darius and the Olaf have been accelerated to the point of being unkillable. You lose the game, all while flaming your jungler for not giving you enough ganks. Just to touch on the phrase accelerated there, in League of Legends, dying is very, very bad. There are two simple ways to judge strength in League: gold and experience. There's no passive XP in League, so when you're dead, you're standing completely still. However, relative to anyone who is alive and doing literally almost anything, you're getting weaker. Additionally, dying to an enemy grants them a chunk of XP. If both champions are level 6, a solo kill is worth something like 6 or 7 melee minions in XP. That's huge. Gold is generated passively, but if you relied on passive gold alone, it would take something like 20 minutes to generate 2500 G, so it's extremely important to supplement that by killing minions, monsters and other objectives. If you're dead, you won't be doing that. Additionally, dying to an enemy grants them a chunk of gold, 300 gold as standard. The problem of accelerated lanes is that you can be having a perfectly fine lane, having a slight lead on your opponent, only to look at the other side of the map and realise the enemy jungler and top laner, for example, are significantly ahead of you. That's why dying is so bad in League. You don't just make yourself weak, you make everyone in your team weaker relative to the enemy. So that's what losing lane wrongly looks like. But why does it happen to so many players? League of Legends is an amazing game, and for me, winning in League is an incredible feeling. That feeling's made even more special when I know that I've directly contributed to the outcome of the game. Now that doesn't mean that I have to carry 1v9 to feel good, it just means that I enjoy League more when I know I've contributed to winning. For some players, however, that 1v9 carry mentality is the entire reason they play the game. Some players don't mind whether they win or lose, they just enjoy playing. There's a whole spectrum of how and why people enjoy League, and everyone's on that spectrum somewhere. Many players will change their position on the spectrum over time. For example, I used to be a player who was determined to carry all my games 1v9, and I've slowly drifted to somewhere more in the middle where I'm just happy so long as the team wins. For me, players whose main source of enjoyment comes from the 1v9 carry type situation are likely to have larger egos, and when these players go behind in games, they'll be unable or unwilling to change their attitude. This leads to players continually dying while making ultra aggressive plays from behind, like the Vayne in the prior example. An ideal player would have a certain level of apathy towards their own individual lane, but they can't be too apathetic, or you end up in a similar situation. If a player doesn't care at all whether they win or lose, then what's the consequence for playing poorly? Why should they consider win conditions when they don't care if they win? This is all to say that I think the ideal League of Legends player is someone who cares strongly about winning the game, but doesn't care how they get to that point. These players would focus on the team's overall win conditions and would happily play in a losing lane if it meant the team had a higher chance of winning the game. I've pulled together this quick graphic to describe what I mean. As you can see, a player who doesn't care about their individual or team performance is just playing for fun. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in most circumstances, but obviously in a ranked match, that's not ideal. A player who wants to do well individually, but not necessarily as a team, could be considered a KDA player. They're just trying to pad their stats. A player who wants to do well themselves and win would be your typical 1v9 carry mentality player. And the player who wants to win, even if it means sacrificing their own performance, is our optimal player, or at least my opinion of what an optimal player would be. Ideally, I'd want all players to be playing in that top left quadrant. However, practically speaking, if a player is too far to the right or down, shown in red, then they're unlikely to move towards this idea of an optimal player, at least in the short term. The player who's furthest away from the optimal quadrant is one we haven't spoke about yet, the KDA player. KDA players don't care if they win or lose, they only care that their stats look good on the end screen. These players will generally be overly cautious, often hanging around the edge of teamfights without getting involved. They will primarily be using cooldowns to protect themselves and secure killing blows without actually contributing much. They're unlikely to lose lane, but they're also unlikely to convincingly win lane or carry the game, while the optimal player will recognise that sometimes risks have to be taken in order to win, particularly if other lanes are doing poorly. The KDA player will make no such judgment and will play every game with the same game plan to have a good score. So for those that are capable of moving towards the optimal zone, how can they do this? The biggest advice that I can give right away is to start thinking about win conditions as soon as you see the two teams lining up. A lot of players pick their champion based on laning phase. E.g., the enemy team picked Garen, so I'll pick Teemo. This is consistent with a player who wants to do well as an individual, but in reality I think you'll find more success picking for the team. Win conditions can be a wide variety of things. It might be champion specific, like we have a Kayle and a Master Yi, so let's focus on farming early and only group once we're forced to. It could be objective related, like we have a strong bot side, so let's prioritise early dragons and look for dragon soul in the mid game. Now, the best laid plans of mice and men and all that, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes people have a bad game and your initial win condition is no longer viable. The important thing about playing to win is that you're flexible. You should be able to adapt and recognise what your new win condition is. Going back to our original example with Vayne and Darius. Let's say at the start of the game, the Vayne top was planned to be the win condition. She was going to bully the Darius, get fed and carry the game with an enchanter support. Well, if you recall, Vayne wasn't doing so hot in that example, but the rest of the team were doing well. So at that point, the win condition may well have changed from Vayne being the primary carry to someone else. Or perhaps the early dragon stacks were going to play a role. As the Vayne in that situation, it's important you recognise the change in the win condition and play accordingly. As discussed before, that probably means playing passively in lane and looking to stay in touch with the Darius in terms of XP and gold, rather than trying to get kills. Yes, at the end of the day, you may have lost lane, but you played for the team and you will be rewarded with some juicy LP. Now for some practical tips on how to actually lose lane well. First thing I would say is that vision is super important. If you're losing lane, it may well be because you're being pressured by other members of the enemy team, be it the jungler or a roaming mid laner, whatever it is. Being able to see them coming and make calculated decisions on whether to run, turtle on their tower, recall, makes a huge difference. Secondly, you have to accept that you might have to give up some CS. I know it's extremely frustrating watching the cannon minion die without getting a last hit, but if walking up for that last hit gets you killed, then you have to just relax, take a deep breath and make sure you get to last hit all the minions that you safely can. Next up is communication, whether it be through chat or pings. If you're playing a losing lane while everyone else is doing well in your team, it can be super tempting to start demanding help from them. But remember, that might not always be optimal for the team. What I would say is only do this if you're in a real tough spot. For example, if your laner set up a really good freeze and you have no way to break it, then yeah, asking for 30 seconds of your jungler's time to break it may well be a good play. Just make sure to ask them nicely. So to summarise, losing lane wrongly can be the difference between winning and losing the game. Try and get away from the mindset that your individual performance is the most important thing. Identify win conditions with your team and work towards them as a collective. Accept that sometimes you won't be the carry, and that losing lane in the correct way can actually win you the game. And lastly, a word of caution. Don't fall into the trap of playing too cautiously every game though, otherwise your games will just become coin flips. I'm not suggesting that you should go into games expecting to have a weak lane, just that you should know how to have a good weak lane should it happen. Thank you all very much for listening. Leave any comments you have down below, hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll speak to you next time.